The night air was sharp, carrying the smell of damp asphalt and fried food drifting from a closing taco stand. Street lamps flickered above cracked sidewalks, throwing crooked shadows across shuttered laundromats and peeling billboards. This was not the kind of street where a president's car ever belonged. Trump's motorcade moved slowly, its sleek black cars gliding like foreign objects in a tired neighborhood. Cracked basketball hoops leaned over empty courts, and faded neon signs buzzed with half-dead light. Inside the limousine, Secret Service shifted uneasily, their voices low in the earpieces. "Sir, this isn't our usual route." Trump leaned closer to the window, ignoring the tension in their voices. His tone was steady, almost restless. "I want to see real America tonight." As the convoy turned a dim corner, the headlights caught a frail woman bent over a cart. Something about her made Trump roll his window down. Trump lowered the window, his eyes narrowing at the frail figure walking beneath the orange street lamp. She was slow, deliberate, pushing a small cart filled with folded blankets, an old teapot, and pieces of a life no one else seemed to want. Trump called, his voice stern yet uneasy, "It's late. Why are you out here alone? Don't you have a family?" The woman stopped, her wrinkled hands tightening on the cart handle. Slowly, she turned toward him. Her silver hair caught the light like a fragile halo, her eyes, worn yet burning, fixed first on Trump, then strayed to somewhere beyond, as if staring into every person who might listen. She let out a long sigh. "Family," she echoed softly. "Beta, ekwokt tha jab meragar tha. Tum sok rohi ho main yan kyan hoon. Suno main surf tum hein nahi, sapko suna rahi hoon. Wakia jo mir sath hua, kisi kub hi sath ho sakta hai." The guards stiffened, but Trump raised a hand to silence them. "Go on," he whispered. The road itself seemed to hush, waiting for her story to begin. The grandmother leaned slightly on her cart, as if gathering her breath before opening an old chest of memories. Her gaze didn't waver, it was steady, sharp, the kind you rarely expect from someone so fragile. "You see me here, on this cold street," she began, her voice soft, yet thick with something heavier. "But there was a time when I walked proudly into my own house. A small house, yes, paint chipping, roof leaking whenever it rained, but mine. Every corner smelled of food I cooked with my own hands. Every wall carried laughter, little fingerprints from children running about." Her lips trembled with a ghost of a smile, then flattened. "I gave everything to that home. My savings, my hands, even my youth. I raised sons who once clung to me for comfort. I mended clothes when money was thin. I starved so they would eat. And I thought that kind of love would never be forgotten." Her voice cracked on the last line, the tremor echoing beyond Trump's window. She leaned closer. "But the truth, Beta, is that sometimes love is forgotten. Sometimes, the roof you built with your own hands becomes a shelter where you are no longer welcome." A silence pressed down on the motorcade. Even the humming engines seemed to pause. Grandma's fingers tapped against the cart as she whispered, almost to herself, "That was the beginning of my journey to these streets." The grandmother's eyes seemed to drift past the streetlight as if it were a doorway pulling her into another time. Her voice, though fragile, wrapped around the night like a thread of memory. "That house, it wasn't much, but it was alive," she murmured. The paint peeled on the porch, the floor creaked when you walked down the hallway, and rain always found its way through the roof. But every window there held sunlight, every corner smelled of food I cooked from scraps, and every evening echoed with the laughter of children." She paused, her hands tightening around the cart's handle. "I watched my sons grow in that house. They didn't have much, but I gave them everything: shoes when I had none for myself, warm meals when my stomach stayed empty. I thought sacrifice was the language of love. And I believed that love would be enough to hold us together." Her voice dropped lower, trembling. "But greed has a way of rotting even the strongest roots. When my husband passed, the house stood in my name. My sons, my blood, said they needed it. They told me it would be better for everyone if I left, that they had families of their own now. Imagine hearing your own child say, 'Mother, this is no longer your place.' The words hung heavy. Even the guards turned their eyes away, ashamed to listen to what she had endured. That night, she whispered, I carried only this cart. In it were my few belongings, but inside my chest, I carried a question far heavier. How could a home built on my hands decide it no longer had room for me? For the first time, her eyes glistened with tears. Yet her voice, steady and unbroken, cut straight into Trump's silence and into the hearts of anyone listening. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his leather seat. For once, the rehearsed lines and polished confidence that usually carried his voice felt distant. He leaned forward, his brows furrowed. But why? He asked quietly. Why would your own children do this to you? The grandmother's lips curved into a bitter smile, the kind that comes not from humor but from wounds too old to cry over. Greed, Beta, she said. Greed, and the blindness it brings. Money can turn love into silence and blood into strangers. Her eyes lowered, staring at her trembling hands. I gave them everything: education, food, shelter, my years of labor. When others mocked us, I stood tall for them. I thought my strength would carry them forever. But when property papers and inheritance became the talk of the house, I was no longer their protector. I became a burden. Her voice hardened, shaking like glass on the edge of breaking. Do you know what it feels like, when your grandson, whose hair you once brushed before school, avoids your eyes as they lock the door behind you? When the same hands you held while crossing the street will not open the gate to let you back in? The words struck like a blade. Trump's jaw clenched. The convoy hummed quietly, the guards turning their eyes away, embarrassed to witness pain that felt uncomfortably intimate. Her gaze pulled upward again, locking into Trump's. People think betrayal comes from enemies. No. The deepest wounds are carved by love, the kind you trusted with your life. And when they leave you, the world grows colder even under the warmest sun. She took a shallow breath, her cart rattling slightly in her grip. That was my lesson, Mr. President. Money filled their pockets, but it emptied their hearts. And that night, I stepped into the streets not only with my belongings, but with a truth burning inside me. Sometimes blood turns colder than stone. Trump, for once, had no words, only silence, heavy and unmovable, filling the car like a shadow. For the first time in a long while, Trump did not interrupt, defend, or argue back. The usual sharp comebacks sat heavy on his tongue but refused to move. He leaned back against the leather seat, eyes still fixed on the frail figure outside the window. Her story pressed against him harder than the cold glass between them. Her words about greed rang louder than the engines of 10 black cars humming behind him. He thought of his own world: gold ceilings, mirrored halls, buildings that carried his name in bright letters. They were monuments of success, yes, but also walls that kept him apart from people like her. A small flicker passed in his mind, his mother's hands adjusting his tie when he was young, whispering, "Family first, Donald." That memory brought an ache he wasn't expecting, and for a moment, he looked away, not wanting the guards to notice moisture gathering in his eyes. The Secret Service shifted uneasily, one of them whispering into his earpiece. Trump raised a hand. "Quiet," he ordered, his voice low but firm. "I need to hear this." The convoy fell silent again. The night felt strangely timeless. And though Trump sat inside the most guarded car in the nation, he had never felt so exposed. The grandmother's lips curved into something almost like a smile, though it carried no joy. She shifted her weight, resting one hand firmly on the cart's handle. Her voice grew steady, delicate yet unshakable, as though she was no longer speaking just to Trump but to every silent witness hidden in the night. "Beta, have you ever heard the story of the tree?" Trump frowned faintly, but said nothing. "There was once a tree," she continued, "that gave shade to everyone who passed beneath it. In the summer, people rested under its branches. In the winter, they burned its fallen wood for warmth. 4 years, it gave fruit freely, never asking for anything in return. All it wanted was to stand tall and shelter those it loved." She drew a deep breath, her voice tightening like brittle glass. But one day, the people who had lived under its protection no longer saw its worth. They said it was old, useless. They cut down its branches, stripped its bark, and left its trunk to rot in the corner of the field. A stillness stretched across the street, even the flickering lamp seemed to pause. Her eyes glistened as she looked directly at Trump. "That tree," she whispered, "is what I became. Years of giving, and in the end, they tried to reduce me to nothing but firewood. But do you know the truth? Even as a stump, a tree remembers every hand it sheltered." Her words struck like echoes inside the sealed limousine. Trump shifted in his seat, his jaw tightened, his eyes shimmering in the dim light. For a moment, he forgot the weight of the title he carried. He was no longer the president. He was just a son, listening to his grandmother tell him the hardest truth of all. For a long while, Trump said nothing. The words about the tree rattled inside him like loose change in an empty box. His fingers tapped restlessly on the leather armrest, but there was no rhythm, no order, just the uneasy beat of a man wrestling with himself. He looked at her again. The fragile curve of her shoulders. The trembling grip on that old cart. The silver hair reflecting the orange glow of the lamplight. She seemed so small, yet her story had filled the entire street with weight heavier than stone. Trump's chest tightened. His voice, usually booming and full, slipped into something rare, almost a whisper. "You remind me of my mother." The guards exchanged surprised glances, but dared not speak. For the first time, Trump didn't sound like a president. He didn't sound like a businessman. He sounded like a son admitting a silence he had carried too long. He leaned closer to the window, eyes softening. "Mother," he said again, barely audible, but the word cut through the thick air like a bell. The grandmother's expression did not change, but her eyes warmed faintly, as though recognizing the boy still hidden beneath all that armor. In that moment, the man who once held the highest office in the world was stripped down to something simpler, something true, just a child listening to the truth from an elder's voice. Trump's throat felt tight as he struggled to find words. The motorcade around him stood still, engines humming like a faint heartbeat in the background. Slowly, he leaned closer, his usual authority stripped away, his voice uncertain but weighted with sincerity. "No one," he said quietly, "no one deserves this life. Tell me, if I could give you something, what would you want?" The grandmother shook her head gently. Her wrinkled hand lifted slightly, steady despite the wind, as if blessing him through the cold night air. "Beta, I don't ask for gold. I don't ask for houses. I only ask this: make sure no mother, no grandmother, ever walks these streets alone. Take the love you were given, and pass it forward. That is enough." Her voice settled into the dark like a soft prayer. Trump bowed his head slightly, not as a president performing duty, but as a son receiving counsel. The motorcade eventually moved again, but the silence inside Trump's car was heavier than steel. For all his life he had measured power in towers, applause, and gold, but tonight, power looked like a frail woman standing beneath a broken lamp, refusing to let her story die. He sat back, staring out the window as her figure slowly disappeared into the shadows. The street swallowed her small cart, but her words remained, echoing louder than the engines. The world outside rushed past, but in his mind, he was still that boy hearing his mother's whisper, "Family first." That night wasn't about policies, politics, or headlines. It was about something smaller and much larger. The value of love over wealth, of voices easily discarded, of remembering those who once sheltered us. And perhaps, in that quiet, unguarded space, the most powerful man in the nation learned the simplest truth: a heart without family is poorer than any empty pocket.